Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of the WorkDad podcast. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on TikTok and Instagram at workdad.io and on Twitter at workdadpod, P-O-D. There's not a lot there yet, as this is the first episode, but that's where to find me. Some of you already know me. I'm pretty sure mom and dad are watching. Hello. Nice to see you guys. Some of you do not. So I'll give you a quick rapid overview. We'll probably talk more about it as you stick with me over many episodes. I've worked in the tech industry for over 25 years, most of that time for a company called Adobe, more recently at a social impact startup called Propel, where we were trying to help low-income Americans improve their financial wellness, and still are. I started my career answering phone calls in tech support right out of school and worked a variety of jobs before eventually becoming a vice president of product management. And my North Star through my career has been finding projects and people and places that give me more energy than they took. Not sure on the grammar there, but we'll stick with it for now. Work has been a source for me of some of my most cherished relationships, greatest growth as a person, some of my proudest accomplishments, biggest challenges. And the goal of the WorkDad podcast is to help everyone find the courage and inspiration to get the most out of their professional lives, your professional life. And one way to do that is by bringing in guests to share their stories and their lessons learned. And I'm thrilled to welcome our first guest, Veronica Belmont. Veronica Belmont has had multiple careers in a way and has made courageous decisions to bet on herself a variety of times. In a world where follower count is a measure of worth to some people, Veronica's largely stepped away from over 1 million followers. As I bring her onto the stage, I just want to ask you all to take a moment, give the show a like, click subscribe. We are just at the beginning. You can be part of building something because that's fun to do. And head on over to patreon.com/workdad to support the show. So with that, welcome, Veronica. It is so great to have you. How are you doing?
I'm awesome. Thank you so much for having me on the first episode. It's quite an honor, honestly. I have been podcasting for many decades now, I guess, at least 2 decades.
Yes.
And starting a new podcast is a lot of work.
It is, but it's fun. And honestly, Veronica, I'm going to have to avoid calling you all the nicknames that we have because nobody else knows these. But this is a chance for me to talk to people who I'm fascinated by and admire and hang out. So it doesn't feel like work. It feels like a real treat, and really grateful that you were able to make some time to join us. So we're going to kind of do this thing together the first time. And so we'll wind our way through, but I think we're going to kind of start all the way at the beginning. Tell us where you grew up. Where were you born? Tell us about basically a little bit about what your childhood was like.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I grew up in a town called West Hartford, Connecticut. So back in the 80s, which was, a magical time of a lot of freedom for kids. We got to pretty much have the run of the neighborhood and get up to a lot of trouble and a lot of fun. But I was a very, typically kind of like nerdy but also outdoorsy kid, if that makes sense. Like I loved video games, but I could also escape into the backyard for many hours and do the stuff that, finding tadpoles, like eating weird things out of the garden, that kind of stuff. But yeah, it was, I had a great childhood. I have no complaints in that regard. My parents were really open to letting me try a lot of new things, try a lot of new activities and sports. I never really stuck with anything though. And that's an interesting kind of side channel to think about now that I am a parent. Like the value of pushing someone towards something that you think that they'll be really good at or advance in versus letting them choose their own direction. Yeah, and that was kind of my very typical late '80s, early '90s childhood, and, read a lot of books, played a lot of video games, and got outside as much as possible.
So, what did your parents do? What were their professions?
So interestingly, this is kind of a fun story. I come from a toy industry family, if that makes sense.
So
My mom,
typical, just like
yeah, my
everybody.
mom, my mom worked at Coleco, which some people may not know of these days, but was a big player in the toy and game space. My dad worked for Hasbro. My grandpa worked for Parker Brothers, and that was also my mom's first job as well. And so I can definitely say that I was on the like spoiled end of the spectrum in terms of getting to have a lot of different types of toys and electronics around the house growing up, which I think was a very early thing for me to get excited about. Like I wanted to play video games. I wanted to work on computers. I wanted to have gadgets. I wanted to like build things. So that was really fun for me. But yeah, they let me experiment with all that stuff, which I find to be, you know, really formative for what I got into later in life.
So, was it a playful household, a geeky household, both?
Um, it's my parents divorced when I was 2. So,
Okay,
like, it wasn't like it was definitely a fun, good childhood, but it wasn't like a perfect utopia of like, that kind of situation. But my mom did an incredible job. I grew up with her primarily. And she was like definitely working mom. Like she was like the VP of corporate communications for Coleco. She wore like suits with big shoulder pads and high
oh, nice.
heels. Like she was a badass. Am I allowed to swear on this show? I didn't ask you that in
Absolutely.
advance. All right, she was a badass. Not really too bad of a swear. But it was funny because she used to go to this trade show called CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, which I'm sure many
Mhm.
of your audience have heard of. And I had to do that later in my career. And I would complain and complain about like how exhausted I was and how tired I was all the time. And she was like, I don't want to hear you complain. I would go to CES pregnant with you in 4-inch heels. And I was like, okay, fair, fair. That's good. Good perspective to give me there. But yeah, she was a wonderful role model for just the kind of woman I wanted to grow into for sure. But we had a blast. We would go on day trips together. We would do fun things together all the time, and she's still one of my best friends.
So, I mean, that's not something everybody gets to say, so congratulations on that. It is You said that she was kind of a badass and also someone that, was a role model. Do you at that age, like, growing up, not obviously at 2 necessarily, but, as you were growing up, did you know that? Not everybody, especially, you know, boys tend to argue with their dads, young girls tend to argue with their moms.
Oh my god, I was the
Did did
worst.
did you see this? Like, did you really look up to her at that time, or was it a little bit later that that developed?
I think there was definitely a more of a passive admiration, but I think it wasn't until I got into college that I really realized, like, how
Mhm.
tough she was, and how good she was at what she did. I think it's hard to put on any kid that age to understand truly the full impact of what their parents are doing to support them, and really letting that sink in until later, until you kind of have that outside perspective of leaving and being like, "Oh my gosh, they did so much for me. Wow."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, do you remember the first thing that you wanted to be when you grew up?
This is so stupid. I remember distinctly being asked that question in, like, 2nd grade, and telling the teacher I wanted to be a lemming farmer, which is not a job, by the way. I don't know if you're aware of that, not a thing that people do.
No.
I don't know where I got that idea, and then I did went the typical route of being like, "I'm gonna be a marine biologist," and then
No.
yeah,
That's
and
what
like
I wanted to be.
every other kid of that
What?
era, yeah, we all wanted to be marine biologists for some reason, um, and I think it must have been from old Flipper episodes on Nick at Night that did it
Yeah,
for
Jacques
me,
Cousteau maybe? I don't know.
Maybe, yeah, and then later I wanted to be a mathematician for a little while, because I really loved long division. And then the thing that stuck was in high school, I decided I wanted to be an audio engineer. And so that was what I actually ended up going to college for.
Interesting. What turned you on to being an audio engineer?
I had a friend who was going to the college. He was graduating 2 years ahead of me, and he was going to school at Emerson, where I eventually went. And that's what he was going to school for. And I thought he was like the coolest person I knew. And I was like, oh my gosh, that can be a job. Like, I like music. I like doing that kind of stuff. That sounds like I didn't even know that existed. And honestly, I feel like that is such a spark point for so many people to just even realize that there's something out there that they didn't even know could be a job that is just like so fascinating. Like, oh my god, like people make money doing that? Like that's incredible. I could do that. And so that's exactly the kind of spark that I had to lead me into my eventual career and hobbies, and everything I've pretty much done with my professional life since then was just that moment of being like, "Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, let me try that."
Well, it's interesting you bring it up that way. People seem to make like they weigh different things when they're making career decisions at different points in their lives. It sounds like for you, the audio engineer piece was more just like, that's fun. I can do something that I love and get paid for it. Was it that simple? Were there other factors that were in consideration? Like, I think I can do this, or I like what they could get paid, or I don't have to go to grad school, or did anything else like that like fit into the equation?
I honestly thought like only doctors went to extra school. So like
Mm,
that did not factor in for me at all. I had no idea about like, next level, like master's degree and things like that at that time. Um, money did not factor into it at all. It was totally 100% like, that sounds cool. I think I could be good at that. I think I have a good ear for music. Like, let me try that out. Um, it was purely like I could envision myself, like, in a recording studio, like, with bands, like, being kind of like the ringleader, helping to drive these fantastic creations in some way, and without necessarily having actual musical talent myself, which, probably helps a lot of actual producers out there, but I loved the engineering aspect of it. I thought that was so fun, and it really kind of brought together a lot of my personal interests and hobbies into what could be a career.
well, so you graduated with what degree?
A bachelor's in audio radio production.
Okay. And you were an intern at Q Division Studios
Yeah.
before you became an audio production intern at CNET. Tell us about how that played out.
Yeah, so that was the internship was still when I was in Boston. So it was
Hmm.
a studio in Somerville, and they did a lot of great records. They worked with James Taylor. They had like, oh God, what's that incredible? Oh, I can't remember his name. Tons of bands that I loved too would just show up in the studio. I got to hang out with Franz Ferdinand. I got to hang out with a band I loved called Hot Rod Circuit. And I really then got my first taste of what it meant to be a woman in a male dominated industry.
Mm.
Like it kind of punched me right in the face where like the boy interns would be asked to like set up the studio, get all the equipment together, get things ready to go for the recording session. And it would literally be like, Veronica, go make the coffee. Veronica, go pick up the lunch. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, I know these dudes don't know any more than I do. And yet, this is like a blatant sexist situation happening right now. And that kind of like just made me more angry and more determined, I think, in a lot of ways. And so after I left that internship to eventually graduate and move out to San Francisco, I wanted to get a job as a I don't even know what it would be called, like an apprentice of sorts, at one of the live recording venues or studios in town. And I just literally went to every single one of them, brought my resume, like offered to work hard. And yeah, no one's going to hire just some random chick off the street who has zero experience. And so that was, that was frustrating and difficult, but I kept looking and looking until one day on Craigslist, I saw an advertisement for an internship at CNET, which I didn't know much about. I knew they were like a reviews site. It was still very early, kind of in that world. It was 2004.
Mm.
Um, and they wanted an audio production intern. And I was like, okay, like that sounds right up my alley. So I sent in my resume, I wrote a cover letter, I got a call back. I was literally sleeping on a mattress on the floor in a living room in like a railroad style apartment in San Francisco with $600 in my bank account. Like nothing. Like I was about ready to kind of like throw in the hat and give up, go back to Connecticut. I had only moved out to San Francisco because my two best girlfriends moved out there with me. We all drove out there together from the East Coast, just to see if we could make it work.
Mhm.
And that was like the changing point, the kind of like real moment of like, oh, maybe I can do this. And yeah, I went in. They had me edit some things on the spot. They had me like run the soundboard, and I got the job. And that was kind of the start of everything.
It's amazing. You didn't know anyone there, you had no
No.
connections to it?
No, didn't know a single person. I was like 23 years old. Yeah.
So, looking back on it now, what do you think gave you the stubbornness, the wherewithal to stick with doing this versus giving up after all the times that you were not finding any jobs? Just the fact that you still had money in your bank account?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. That's a great question. I sometimes joke that I don't have enough grit, and that's usually I usually attribute that to my sporting activities.
Mm.
But I think when it comes to career, I've got a little more kind of gumption in that regard. Like I just kept pushing and pushing until it clicked. And I don't have any better advice than that. Yeah, it just was I was in the right place at the right time. I still can't believe that I found that ad. Like it was such happenstance. And it completely changed the trajectory of my life.
What do you think would have happened if you moved back, if you hadn't gotten that role?
Oh, well, that's a great question. I'm not sure. I didn't have a backup plan. San
Mhm.
Francisco was my backup plan because I was originally supposed to move to Philadelphia with a boyfriend, and then he broke up with me, and I was like, "Well, I guess I'll go to San Francisco with my 2 best girlfriends instead." And so that was already the backup plan. I didn't have a I didn't have like a third option lined up ready to go. I probably would have gone home and like, you know, just kind of sucked it up for a little bit and then figured out my next step. I've literally never thought of that before, Brian. I've
Uh,
never thought about like what would have happened. I
I
probably would
think
have
it's
gotten
just
a retail job somewhere for a
mm,
while. I don't know.
it's wild because there's so much chance involved, especially early on in your career, getting your foot in the door, finding something, and now we'll kind of get into what happened from there, but, I mean, crazy things happened for you after
Yeah.
that, and they were that close to not happening, and obviously, there's a lot of people out there that especially in today's market, coming out of school, are absolutely facing the same situation, like, "Should I stick with this? Should I try something I don't wanna do?"
Mhm.
It is remarkable. It's a little different, like, probably
It's
a
a little
little
different.
easier to get a response to an application and a resume, back then than it is right now.
I mean, just to go off on a tangent for a second, I've been seeing videos on TikTok and articles that say like just the sheer number of applicants for every online
Mhm.
application out there right now is so crazy that you almost have to know someone at the company to get a referral.
Yeah.
Like it's the only way at this point. And I'm in that position, or I will be in that position shortly, and so it's very daunting. It's very
Yeah.
daunting.
Yeah. Well, I definitely wanna get to that part as well. So then tell us what happened from there. So you start at CNET. Um, what in the world happened after that?
Oh god, where do I even start? CNET was fantastic. I was working first kind of on the ZDNet side of the business, which was more like white papers and webinars and very dry, kind of like not that interesting stuff. But I happened to start working with a guy named James Hilliard, who was producing CNET's new daily tech news podcast called Buzz Out Loud. And he decided it was too much work for him to take on. He was wondering if I wanted to step in and produce the show. And so I started doing that. And the two hosts of the show were Tom Merritt and Molly Wood. And they were like senior editors for the site, great writers, great on camera. And, they wanted to get into this podcasting thing, which at the time was obviously very, very new. There was no iTunes store yet. Like everything had to be edited manually. I had to like hand write XML and update the RSS feed automatic, like manually every single day. It was a pain in the butt. But it was so much fun. And so I was getting to like sit in the seat and listen to two of the smartest people I knew talk about technology and talk about gadgets and talk about the impact that these things had on the world at large. And after about 6 weeks, I found that I couldn't really keep my mouth shut. And I started like turning on my little board side mic and like interjecting things. And Tom and Molly would be like, and that's our producer, Veronica. Like, in case you were wondering who this random voice in the background is. Um, and I started doing that enough that eventually their boss, Mark Larkin, asked me to come on as a third co-host. And that just kind of springboarded me from there, doing more podcasts for the network, and then eventually doing video content for them as well.
What were your days like? What did you spend? What was that job comprised of doing?
Basically, I would get into the office in the morning. It was at the CNET building on Second Street in San Francisco, before they were bought by CBS, and I would start looking at news stories with Tom and Molly and kind of working on the rundown for the day. So basically the stories that we were going to talk about. I would comb through listener feedback, whether it was from our forums or from email. No Twitter at the time. That came much later. Not too much later, actually, 2005 or so, 2006. And just putting together the show. I was also editing and producing a video series called First Look from the Labs, where I was editing sometimes 10 to 15 short 1 to 2 minute video clips of product reviews from the other CNET editors. And so I was editing in Final Cut. Having to do that is like what my actual job was, and the podcast
Mhm.
was a little more of like the side hustle at work. And that was my day. Yeah, either editing audio and the RSS feeds, putting the show together with Tom and Molly, and editing the First Look from the Lab series, and then eventually hosting, producing, and sometimes editing my own video content as well.
What was success there? What was the culture like? Collaborative, competitive?
Very collaborative, especially with Tom and Molly. I had to struggle for a long time because I was an associate producer and I wanted to be an editor. It was very important to me that I got the title of editor. I felt like that was much more like important sounding, especially in a news organization. And so that was a big deal for me. Like that success for me was getting that title, that specific title that I wanted. I was making $35,000 a year. Like
Mhm.
that, and to me, that was more money than I had ever seen in my life. And I was just like, oh my God, like I'm in the big time. Like this is incredible. And yeah, even with inflation, that still wasn't very much, for living in San Francisco in
Yeah.
those days. But I felt like I was on top of the world, and I was starting to get like known in the tech industry in San Francisco. Like that was also like really exciting for me. I was going to lots of events, and CNET was putting on like in-person get-togethers. We were doing live coverage at CES, as I mentioned previously. So it got to be like, oh, like I'm kind of making a name for myself in this industry. That's super cool, and not something I ever expected to happen.
I would guess from the outside, I was just curious in that world whether folks kinda didn't want you to succeed, or there was kind of a finite amount of airtime or a finite amount of, production time available, and did you run into that at all?
Not so much. I think we were small enough then that it felt like a little family. So I didn't feel too much of that kind of pressure. It wasn't until there got to be more podcasts and more video shows like what we were doing that I started getting comparisons to other women in technology. And
Mm,
like, there were lists and there were like, who's cool and they didn't say cool, but you know what I mean? Like those kinds of like
uh-huh.
listicles.
Yeah.
And then it was like, oh, I don't love that. I don't love that we're all being like pitted against each other. And it was always like me and like Natalie Del Conte and Morgan Webb and like these other women working in the gaming world. And it was like, why does it have to be like this? Like it's so shitty feeling. Um, so that kind of started later, kind of after like Twitter kind of got running and the blogosphere was really taking off, and Web 2, that whole scene was very like flashy and BuzzFeedy, and
Yeah.
it was a different time.
Well, so at this was it at CNET that you started to get a social following, or when did that really start?
Yeah, so that kind of took off with Twitter. So I think I joined Twitter in 2006, I believe. And I was lucky enough to get my first name as my handle, which was not that difficult back in those days. And my name is somewhat unusual, so it was not super common. Um, and I got added on the suggested user list for technology people to follow. And just all of a sudden it started skyrocketing, and it went from like 100 to 10,000 to 100,000, and it just kept going up. And then like actual famous people got on Twitter and like the scale suddenly changed in like a big way. But for a while there I was the most followed woman on Twitter for like 6 months, which was kind
How
of
old
wild.
how old were you when this happened?
Like 24, I think.
That's a
So
lot
that was a lot.
that's a lot to absorb as a 24-year-old. How did you handle it?
Um, to varying degrees, I would say. I think it felt like a lot of pressure to perform all the time. Like it went from, and I think a lot of people experience this. If, say for example, you get a viral video on TikTok, then all of a sudden you feel like you have to keep making that kind of content to keep the steam rolling. Well, I was like, what is my like niche? What's going to keep the people happy? Like what's going to keep them engaging? And so it became like went from a fun thing to being like a second job in many ways. And that continued basically until like 6 years ago.
Well, we'll get there in a second. So, you are now still very early in your career, and also very early in social media, and these things are happening at the same time, and one is starting to create expectations around a personality or persona, I would assume, as you're
Mhm.
describing. How is that viewed by professionally at that time? Was that something that your coworkers or bosses were like, "This is great, we're gonna leverage it," or were they like, "No, what's going on over there?" How much did
Oh, they
they
loved
want to
it.
take over? How much did they wanna take over?
No, that never happened. I think that didn't happen until I went freelance,
Mhm.
which happened a little bit later. But yeah, the social following definitely, I think, opened a lot of doors. I mean, that's probably one of the reasons why I eventually left CNET to go to a new startup to work on video content there, because they wanted someone who could help promote that company as well, um, and kind of be the face of it. So there was a lot of pressure there, obviously, to promote my own content, which is fine. Like I wanted to, like I was happy with the content I was making. It didn't feel weird or bad in any way at the time. It was just kind of what my job was. Um, but yeah, there was definitely starting to have a feeling of, oh, like how much do I share about my life? How much is okay? Like people didn't like it when I swore, for example. Like people would get very upset if I dropped an F-bomb in my tweets. And I was like, oh, okay, so that's not my image. So I have to be clean. I have to be like sweet. but also a little funny. It was like, what is the vibe that the audience is looking for?
Did you know the
And it didn't always gel
demographics
with my
of
feeling.
who was following you?
They didn't have analytics for a while, I don't
Yeah.
think. I think it wasn't until later, but yeah, it was definitely the very typical 18 to 35 male demographic that was quite typical of the tech industry at the time.
Got it. So they wanted you to fit a certain image of what they wanted,
Yeah.
for a tech female journalist. Were you
Yes.
Is that right? Would you consider yourself a tech journalist in that way?
I have called myself that. I think that would be fair to say. I did do like freelance like technology writing and work and video content. Video journalism is a thing. So I did do a lot of that, but I would say primarily my roles later was more branded content. So it was less journalism and more like personality based content creation.
I don't understand what that is. So, like, let's get
It's
into that.
literally what you're doing now. It's you
Yes.
you are a personality based content creator, I would say.
Okay. Well, I'll take your word for it. I mean, I've seen that you worked with Sony and PlayStation and
Mhm.
Twit TV and things of that.
Intel, IBM, Discovery
Yeah.
Digital, yeah, a lot of different clients throughout the years.
That was when you were quote unquote a freelancer, or did you work for these folks? Okay, yes. So
Well,
how did that
I
come
so
about?
yeah, so I had been working with for a show called Mahalo Daily, which was Jason Calacanis's startup, Mahalo.com, which was really meant to take on Google at the time because Google was big then, but it was still conceivable to overthrow Google in the search engine space. Like anything was possible. And so we did a video series that was meant to really kind of target SEO, like for popular searches.
Mhm.
So like if a popular search was like how to play guitar, we would do a video series on how to play guitar and we would talk to experts and I would take a class and we would do a whole thing on it. And it was really fun. I got to do a lot of cool, interesting new things. But because all of it was driven by this kind of like SEO keywords and phrases, it was getting started to get away from the core of the things that I was interested in. So it was less about like technology, video games, social media, and more about playing guitar. What is like monkey poop coffee tastes like these things that were like fun to do but not necessarily core to who I was or the things that I was interested in. So after not it wasn't that long, like I think I was there for less than a year. I left, and also I was being forced to travel, 2 weeks out of the month to go down to LA from San Francisco to work on that show. And I was, had a relatively new relationship with my now husband. And so it was very difficult for me to kind of do that and feel sustainable. And so I made the hard decision to walk away. And at that time went like basically freelance ish. I started doing freelance work for Future US, which was the PlayStation show called Core, which was an interactive digital magazine available only on the PlayStation Network. And then doing Techzilla for Revision 3, which later became Discovery Digital, which was a weekly tech help and how to show. So those were like my two main gigs. But at the same time, I was also doing one off branded content for like dice.com or Intel. So I was also doing those kinds of projects, which involved a lot of traveling, a lot of script writing. So it was very, very busy for a while there. Yeah.
Did you have, like, an agent? Is that an even a logical question to ask?
I did. Yes. And he made such a huge difference. So his name is George Ruiz. We're still very good friends. And he was the one who basically like came in. He reached out to me because he had seen my stuff online and was like, I think we can do bigger things. And I was like, okay, well, that sounds interesting. Like, I'm just a kid. Um, and he negotiated my contract for Mahalo. He negotiated all of my contracts basically until 2016. And even then, when I was still occasionally doing one off projects, he would negotiate those contracts. And that was the first time I really understood like my value as a person in terms of like what I should and could be making in this industry. Like I told you, I had no concept of what money meant, like what people were being paid, what these companies could afford to pay. And he opened my eyes to that. And I know he was a pain in a lot of people's asses for that. But he always fought for me. And that was one of I really learned a lot about business and the industry through George.
How did he find you? Like you said, he just found you online. And how did you know to trust this person?
It was hard at first. It was really hard. And Ryan, my husband, was very much like, nervous about it too, because I think he understood as well that like I wasn't getting paid what I was worth and that I could do a lot more with my time and energy. But a Hollywood agent like showing up, calling you on the phone, being like, "I saw you on Twitter, like let's have a conversation," felt really intense. So I actually went to go meet him one year when I was down in LA covering E3, and we met in person and we just totally clicked. And I got to talk to other people he worked with, and he took me out to dinner with some of his other clients, and we just had a blast. And so that just made me feel super comfortable. I was like, okay. And he has always had my back.
If you're comfortable, you're also obviously welcome to not be. You talked about making 35,000 when you first started. Like, what was the impact of his? What was his impact on your compensation?
Probably 2 or 3 years after I left, I had a $400,000 a year, thanks to George.
Wow,
And
and
that
that
was the
was
most money I ever made in my life, and I've never made that much money again. But that was definitely, like, a life-changing amount of money for me, yeah.
wow. So, how did that affect your day to day?
I think not super meaningfully, I would say, honestly. Like, I still didn't buy a house. Like, Ryan and I still lived in a pretty shitty apartment on Haight Street in San Francisco. It was like I think it was like, you know, $1,900 a month or something, which was, still high, but good for the time, good for San Francisco. Um, and I think the only thing it really changed was, like, I was like, "Oh, I can buy clothes. Like, I can actually, like, shop for myself now."
Uh-huh.
Like, I remember, like, the clothes I bought for, like, my interviews at CNET back when I was an intern were so ridiculous, just because I didn't even know what it meant to dress like a professional person. Like, I was, like, a punk rock kid from Boston, like, trying to, like, suddenly dress professionally for, like, corporate America in the technology industry in San Francisco. And so, yeah, that made a big difference with that. I wasn't dressing like high fashion or anything, but I was like, "Oh, I can afford like this nice cardigan from the Gap." Like, and I was able to save some money, which I had also never been able to do. Um, so those things were, and I had to learn how to do taxes, which I
Ah,
definitely didn't know how to
that's
do.
always
And I
fun.
owed like $60,000 one year because I didn't know how to
Yeah,
do my taxes. So
yeah.
that was a big cluster. Yeah.
Well, so you're at what age now at
Um,
that point?
Probably like 27, 28 was like the apex of like that kind of work.
So you're 27, 28. How many followers do you think you had on Twitter at that point?
Over a million, I would
Okay,
say.
so over
Yeah,
1,000,000
yeah.
followers. You're making over 400, $400,000 a year. You've had this
Just
big
that one
jump
year, just that big
that
year.
one year. You have a an agent. Did
Mhm.
that warp your expectations of what was to come? Did you start thinking about this is just the beginning, or what was your
Yeah.
view?
I 100% was like, "I'm gonna be a TV star. Like, I'm gonna be on television. I'm gonna be famous." Like, it had definitely gotten to my head in that way. Like and that was really hard because I did, like, 6 pilots, and they all weren't picked up. And so that was tough. That was kind of like the crushing, like, that was, like, the next, like, 5 or 6 years of just, like, not being able to get over that hump to what I thought was gonna be next. And, yeah, I think everything had led me to believe, like, I could do that. And when reality kind of hit, like, "Oh, this industry is a lot more complicated, a lot harder, a lot tougher to crack than I initially thought, because I had all this previous success behind me and like this echo chamber of people online telling me that they loved my stuff and I was great. And so that was difficult, I think, for my ego and for like my just like emotions and my perception of myself and like what I was able to do. Um so yeah, I think that's what kind of got me in the end, was like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like this is not making me happy.
W I'm interested in that. When you say
Mhm.
it wasn't making you happy, it was the difference between your expectations of what you were hoping it was going to be and what it ended up being, or were there other parts of the work that you were doing that was just starting to be less fulfilling?
There were definitely things that were grating on me for sure, like the constant pressure from the online audience, the comments, the innuendo, the like the harshness of the internet, of like living in a public space and having things kind of like thrown back at you. Um, I remember like probably the pivotal moment for me was I was hosting the Game of Thrones season 6 or 7 premiere. I don't remember. Um, Down in LA. And I was so excited. And like I had a blast the whole night. It was amazing. I got to interview the cast on the red carpet. It was incredible, for HBO online. And I got back to my hotel, like kind of riding the high of this whole thing, to see like the comments online. And they were just like, all I could see were the awful comments. And like, who is this girl? Like, what is she even doing here? Like, she's so stupid, blah, blah, blah. And I just like lost it. I just like basically had a breakdown alone in my hotel room. Like, and I had like 3 cocktails at the after party. So I was like, I was definitely like in my feels in that moment.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I just like called Ryan and I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to feel this way anymore. Like at this point, I don't remember exactly. I think I was probably like 32. And I was like, I don't want this to be my life. Like, I don't want to have to keep pushing and pushing for the next big thing. I don't want to have to keep pushing for not knowing where my next job is necessarily going to come from, because I was freelancing completely at this point. Um, there would be months where I wouldn't get a new gig, and it was just like a lot of pressure on my mental state and my finances, and so it was time for a change for sure. It was not going to lead anywhere good for my mental health, I think.
Well, so you come to this conclusion, you have this breaking point. Had you already been thinking about what was next, or was this the start of thinking about what's after this?
I had been definitely wondering what I was gonna do next. Yeah, I think it was there's definitely an age limit on the kind of work that I was doing in many ways. Like, it sucks to have to say that, but especially at that time, I think it was, I was in my early 30s, but I was not 25 anymore.
Mhm.
Um, and being a woman in the tech industry, especially on camera, was a lot of pressure to like keep up appearances. And that was hard. And the comments, that was hard. Like even just getting married, like Ryan would get comments like, "Why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free?" And it's like, who are you to like say that to me? It was a lot of that kind of stuff all the time. And it just wears on you, like even if you build up a thick skin, it's not healthy to hear all the time, because no matter how many good comments you hear, the bad comments are the ones that are gonna stick with you and like ride shotgun in your brain while you're just like walking around doing day-to-day tasks. Um, but I had no idea what to do. I had no idea what to
Mhm.
do. Like I had put so much time and energy into this path that I thought was going to be my life, that I hadn't spent really any time thinking about what the other options could be. And maybe that's kind of like the a bad side of my personality, or a weird side of my personality, that I get so like tunnel vision on what I want in any given moment that I don't consider the alternate paths. But that's just how I roll.
how was Ryan? How did he receive your message when you told him you're done?
He's like, "Let's do it. Let's figure it out." Yeah, he was like, "Wrap up your contracts. Everything that can be, anything that can be stopped, stop doing it. Like, you need to focus 100% on planning and thinking about what you wanna do next. Like, that is your full-time job now. Like, I can support you while you figure this out, like, we'll make it work. Like, just spend the time. Don't be distracted by other things. Like, this is your job."
Do you think that you would have been able to make this decision if you were alone at that time? If you were
I
single?
don't know. I don't know. I think it might have been too scary to be on my own, and, like, yeah, I could have lasted for a while, like, financially, probably, um, but it would have been difficult in San Francisco to just, like,
Mhm.
not have work, it's not an easy thing to do in any circumstance. Um, I don't know if I would have had the cojones to do it, I just don't know.
So, how then here's Veronica Belmont, agent, star, uh, social media personality, the Veronica on Twitter. You've decided now that you do not want what you've now worked 10, 12 years to build up.
Mhm.
How did you where did you begin? Like, where did you begin to figure out what's next?
A lot of hikes in the woods.
There you go.
A
Yeah.
lot of hikes in the woods. Literally, like, I would just go walk the dog in the woods and just, like, think about what I wanted to do, think about what I liked, think about, like, what about my work previously, like, resonated with me. And a lot of conversations with Ryan, a lot of conversations with other people in the tech industry that I saw as mentors and friends that understood. I knew I wanted to stay in tech. I think that was the main thing, but I did not have a CS degree. I did not have an MBA, as we'd already discussed. Like, it felt very insurmountable to get into the tech world. And so one day, Ryan, who had done this type of work in the past, was like, "I think you'd actually make a really good product manager." And I was like, "What's that? What does that mean? I don't know what that is." Um, and he was like, "I think you should spend some time talking to people and, like, really, like, learning about what strengths could play into a role like that." He's so wise, Brian. He's so wise. He just, like, he's always been like that, like, little angel devil on my shoulder, both angel and devil on my shoulder, like, telling me, "Leave this job, it's terrible," or like, "Go talk to these people and they'll help you figure it out." And so that's what I did. Yeah, I just basically went on a tour to learn about what product management was. Um, and I read every book I could get my hands on, and I watched every video and every podcast, and I talked to everyone in the industry that I could talk to, and just, like, tried to figure out, like, I even, the authors of Cracking the PM interview, like, one of them lived in my building. And so
Oh,
I
wow.
actually got to, like, pull her aside and be like, "Tell me your ways." So that was pretty cool. So I think that was the thing that saved me in the end, was really the my ability to kind of network and talk to people and learn that way. And I had that privilege from having been in, tech industry adjacent for so many years, and meeting so many people at different companies and having these conversations and getting to know them. So I was able to leverage a lot of those connections.
Well, so you took a class or classes on product management, right?
I
You got a
did, yes.
certification, something along those lines, and then you started as a product manager at a startup called Disco in
Mhm.
2016. Do I have that right?
Yes, so they were known as Growbot at the time, and so this was very much in the hype cycle phase of the conversational interfaces and bots world, and I had decided that, or I mean, anyone who works in product management knows that having domain expertise in your field is like one of the key factors for understanding your work and working with engineering and working with customers. And so I was like, all right, I need a domain expertise. Like, what's it going to be? What am I excited about? And like I said, bots were really hot. They were interesting. I was like, this feels like the future to me. This feels like the start of something. So I just dove in head first. I started joining all the communities. I started writing a newsletter. I started doing podcasts about it. And through one of those communities, the founders of Growbot saw me and saw me posting that I was looking for work. And so they reached out and they were like, we'd love to have you come in and have a conversation. And I have zero doubt that they Googled me and saw my following and saw my experience in the tech world and was like, oh, that's interesting for us as a tiny company just starting. Like we could use someone like that to get the word out about the work that we're doing. And I know that because they wanted me to be a product marketing manager.
Mm.
And I was like, I don't want to do that. I want to be a product manager. And they were like, well, we only have 3 employees. People don't usually make their first hire a product manager because the CEO is kind of the product manager. And I was like, I don't care. Take it or leave it. Either I have product manager on my resume or we're not going to have this conversation. And so they're like, okay, well, can you do the work of a product marketing manager, like while you are also doing the product manager work? And I was like, yes. And so that's kind of, I love, like, I don't know if you've ever heard this story before, Brian. So we're going to get to the part where you're
Let's
like,
do
oh, wow, Veronica wasn't even supposed to be a product manager and I still hired her.
it.
We'll get to that part shortly. But they were wonderful. They were so great. These 3 guys, and they worked so incredibly hard on this startup. And I got to like really see it from day one start to grow as something. And it was such an incredible learning experience to be on the ground floor with the founders and get to work so closely hand in hand with the engineers that we eventually hired. Um, and it was so fun and so hard. And I learned just an incredible amount from them.
How did it how did it compare to the work you had been doing before? What was the same? What was different?
Hmm. I got to still do a lot of public speaking. I got to still do a lot of like weirdly, like a lot of on camera and podcast work because
Mhm.
I did become kind of like the de facto face of the company. Because I love doing that kind of stuff. And I really did want to help them get the word out. And also from a selfish perspective, I wanted to position myself as an expert in that industry, and become like, oh, Veronica, like she knows about bots, she knows about this technology, about conversational interfaces, this kind of like beginning of like what AI could be for consumer electronics and technology. Um, and so in that way, it was similar because I got to evangelize a lot, which is something I had already spent a lot of time doing for other companies and products. Um, the way it was different was that I was writing docs. I was working closely with engineering. Like I had worked as a startup advisor before, but I had never really been on the ground floor of like a tech company, or a startup. And so I got to learn so much about like the fundraising process and the like how hard it actually is to keep the lights on at a company like that from both a technology perspective and a financial perspective. Um, and so that was all new to me. And so I was just learning on the go.
So you were doing that for a couple of years, and then what happened?
This guy just pings me on LinkedIn and he's like, he's like, hey, like you have a really interesting background. I think you would be a really good fit at this team that I have here at Adobe. And I was like, that was such a hard message to get. It really was. It was you, by the way. It was you.
It was me.
For those who don't know. Um, and I have a lot of like I had a lot of deep loyalty to that company.
Mhm.
Um, but I was also I don't know at that time if uh, like I said, they were young guys in the tech industry and I was like the oldest person at the company and they were working like 16-hour days, and I felt a lot of pressure to keep up. And I'm a hard worker, but it was becoming to get to a like a burnout phase for me
Mhm.
in a lot of ways. And I always knew also that as part of my product journey, I wanted to have experience at a startup. And then my next goal was always to work for a large company to get the experience of understanding what it would take to be successful at a big organization where there were a lot more, hoops to go through to get things done.
Mhm.
And I was very used to just executing, just doing, making decisions, getting it done, pushing it live that day. Um, and I wanted to be able to learn what it took to build product, to work with teams somewhere a little more complicated. Um, and I
It's
think
funny
you
you say that, Veronica, because that is not my recollection. So the other side of this story, so I was at that point, I think, a director of product management at Adobe. We were in and around a project called, what was it at the time, Adobe Spark.
Mhm.
Really, it was Spark Video was an iPad and mobile app that we had. I don't know if it was a web app at that point. I don't think maybe it was, but um, can't remember.
It was because Lisa was working on it. It was.
Yeah, well, Lisa was so I had to hire a product manager
You had to
for
hire
Spark
a
Video.
senior product manager.
Yes,
This is important
and
to the story.
this is it's a good addition. And what I think a lot of folks don't realize is they think that, hiring managers just get fed applicants from recruiters, especially internal recruiters at a big company, and that wasn't mostly my experience. And I don't mean to throw shade at any recruiters, but I did all the sourcing for all my hires. And um, I had one great candidate. Her name's Lisa Bughosian. Shout out to Lisa if you're out there. And the team loved Lisa. I loved Lisa. Michaela Strand, who is another person there, had helped recruit and evaluate her. But while we were doing that, I had also been out on LinkedIn searching for product manager and video and like random weird searches and combing through profiles. And sure enough, this name comes up, Veronica Belmont. And I look at your background. I'm like, oh, this is really interesting. Like a little journalism, a little front of the camera, knows how to story tell, early in product management, and is at a startup. And so just shot you a note. And it was great to, a lot of times never heard back from folks. Sometimes absolutely heard back. Most of the time didn't work out. But my recollection was you had a little bit of trepidation about leaving startup world.
Oh, I
This was
did. Yeah.
this was like Veronica Belmont of the cool, fast, emerging stuff. Do I really want to join the big behemoth tech company that also Adobe was not necessarily the most up and coming big tech
Mm.
brand? And so I got a lot of vibes from you of like, I don't know if this is what I want to do.
It was the loyalty factor. I think that was more than anything else. Like, I felt very worried about leaving Growbot, now Disco, um, because I'd just been there from day one, from almost day one. I was the first employee. And so for me, I was there was that factor of like, yeah, I'm working on cool stuff. Yeah, it's really fun, passionate, but like, can I really just like leave these guys? And I think it was like I felt like they were in a good place. They had made more hires. They had gotten where they needed to be. And I was like, I need to keep learning. I feel like I remember telling you, like, I think I've learned all I can learn here at this stage. And like, I want to
Yes.
learn more. And I just am cracking up because I did not get that senior product manager role because I think like I don't know like why exactly, but I knew you knew I was green. I was so green.
Yeah.
And my first week, I remember we were like writing PRDs or something, and I was like, you were like, write user stories, and I was like, I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means, Brian. You were like, just write a whole page. And I remember we had a Google Doc open. You're like, just write like 20 user stories. Just like, here's how you write them, just write them. And then like that's your PRD. And I just like wrote like a bunch of user stories. I'm like, here you go. And you're like, that's not a PRD. That's not how this works at all. And I was like, shit, like I really don't know how to do this. Like I had been in this little bubble of like just working so closely with like these three guys and doing things our own way. And then to get into a totally new environment where there was like a lot more structure and a lot more process around how things were done and how things were expected to get done. And I was a total fish out of water for a while. And I was like, oh my God, imposter syndrome. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. But
Mhm.
like everyone was so wonderful and so like open with helping me and teaching me. And yeah, it was great.
Well, it was
You
very
took a chance
fortuitous.
on me.
It was very fortuitous that you required the product management title because you wouldn't have shown up in my search if you hadn't.
Hmm.
And then, I mean, you skipped over the interview, which we had a pretty memorable interview,
We
if I
did. We
recall.
did. I think I was
Uh,
sobbing in the conference room at one point.
yes. So I used to have two questions I'd ask in my interviews. One was, what's the nicest thing someone's done for you? And the
Mhm.
other was, what's the nicest thing you've done for someone else? And the point of these questions was, for me, culture fit's a really big deal, and the quality of the person I'm going to hire is a really big deal. And you'd be surprised how many people struggle to answer. And they're like, you can see it in their faces. What's the nicest thing I've done for somebody else? So they're like, I don't know if I've done, or what's something that someone's done for me? And so generally, there were folks that really you could tell were culture creators. You could tell that people wanted, like, a big part of product management is influencing and bringing people along. And so if there are people, this is not about being liked. It's
Mhm.
just about, actually having a give and take in your professional life. And so when I asked you, I think it was the question, what's the nicest thing you've done for someone else? What happened?
I don't remember what my answer was,
It was about
but I
going to see your father.
yeah, and my dad had just passed away like the week before.
Yes.
And I just started like I think I said that like, "Oh, actually, like my dad just died." And I just started crying and you were like, "Oh, Veronica, oh my god. Like I'm so sorry."
Yeah.
And I don't know, I guess it was like so that's how I got the job, right? Because I cried and so you didn't wanna
Yeah,
make
no,
me
I
feel
felt
sad?
guilty and gave you.
Yeah.
No, it's actually it's fascinating because, I mean, one, certainly not anything I've told people that I have made someone cry in an interview. It's not my proudest moment, but,
Not for the
but
reasons you might expect, yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. But no, I give credit to who was my manager at the time. His name's Aubrey Cattell, still at Adobe, and he and I were evaluating, and I was like, "Look, I think I see something in this person. She is someone who's got evangelism in her background. She doesn't know that's what it's called, but we have evangelists at Adobe, and none of them have the social following she does or the credibility that she does in talking tech. Adobe could benefit from that. Spark could benefit from that. And then also, this is someone who's new to product management. I can teach her product management. And she's so eager and she's got the right energy. And I just see potential in this person. And what I was faced with was a reality of, like, Lisa was just a more hand in glove fit,
Yeah.
and had product management background, had worked at GoPro, and so she was like a must hire for that role. Aubrey gave me the flexibility to say, why not both? And
Mhm.
I've made that decision multiple times in my career as a hiring manager where there are just two outstanding candidates. And in each situation that I've hired both, it has always worked out. I've never regretted it. And we were not going to bring aboard as a senior product manager. We couldn't make that case initially. And we couldn't necessarily even say, here's a full product manager role. So we had kind of this mix product manager evangelism role. And you and I had to craft this in real time
Yeah.
together for the beginning of your career. And I remember being so concerned and feeling responsible for. I've brought you into this situation. I know the evangelism's not where you want your career to go. You want to be a product manager. How do I help you? Adobe's going to see a lot of value in your millions of followers. There's going to be a lot of pull there. How do I protect you from what will be a natural gravitational pull that direction? You and I had to dance for a while to get
Yeah.
you into a role that allowed you to start to grow as a product manager.
I remember, like, at first, we were like, "All right, it's gonna be, like, 70% evangelism, like, 30% product management."
Yeah.
And it definitely was at first, and then I think within the year, it was, like, 90% product management, 10% evangelism,
Yeah.
and that actually happened pretty fast, and but I loved doing the evangelism stuff for Adobe. Like, that part of my job was so fun, and sometimes it got in the way of the actual product work or, like, the time, especially around Max, um,
Max is
when
the
we were d
Adobe conference that
yeah,
happens once a year. Yeah.
when we were doing, like, keynote work and that kinda stuff, and it was intense. It was an intense grind, but it was so fun, and, like, those are some of my favorite memories are being at Max with the team and getting to do all the panels and all the workshops together, and that was, like, a really special time in my life.
Yes, you earned the nickname. I think Lisa gave it to you, Big Stage Belmont.
Yes.
Uh, and
Big
and
stage.
Big Stage. And what was great was you were the person, like, you were a culture creator. You were someone that brought people together, that people formed around you. And this experience that you had, this foundation that you had built around public speaking and around being on stage and not being scared to rehearse and be in front of thousands, if not millions of people, whatever it might be, ended up being a really key skill for you to apply in product management, because product management, as a lot of people start to realize, there's an aspect of it doesn't have to all go this way, but it can absolutely go towards being a public face, being someone who is an influencer of perspective in engineering, in different
Mhm.
sectors or verticals, of customers, of all sorts of things. And so I remember, you know, feeling bad that you were gonna be pulled into the Max vortex, because it's all encompassing. People don't realize this, but at least at Adobe, that was a conference that there was daily rehearsal for months. It just absolutely
Oh my
takes over
gosh.
your life,
It was wild.
and that was time that you weren't gonna be product managing, and that's what I had brought you. My promise to you was that you were gonna learn to be a product manager, and so it's interesting. It's interesting that for you, you remember it as this thing that you loved, while I, meanwhile, all the time was trying to protect you from being
It
overexposed.
was it was definitely stressful, and I think especially as things got, like, as I moved into, the search and discovery part of the work and, like, with the content team, and that became, like, suddenly it felt like I had 2 full-time jobs in many ways, but I still really loved it. I mean, Adobe it's a great company. I think it suffers from a lot of the problems that big companies do, which is it's still hard to get things done sometimes. It's still hard to
Mhm.
work collaboratively across different organizations within the company and across teams. Um, but the people were always the thing that I think back on, like just the incredible team that you built, that Aubrey built. Um, like, I'm still friends with so many of those folks there and respect them and think they do such great work. I'm a paying Express subscriber. Like, I
Yeah,
pay
let's go.
every month to use Express, and I was cracking up yesterday when you and I were troubleshooting over text
Yes.
message for working on stuff because I was like, "Oh, it's just like the old days," just, like, getting in there, finding bugs,
Well, we
looking at the
built
stuff
something
that's great.
together.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
and
built something together, and that was great, and during that time, Little Stage was born, correct?
oh, yes. Yeah, little stage. So yeah, in 2020 in 20 what year was he born? 2020. So right before the pandemic, we decided to start trying for a baby. And I was 38 at the time. So, definitely into geriatric pregnancy land, which is such a horrible phrase, such a horrible
Mm,
phrase. Um, but I had felt at that point that I had, I had like lived my child-free life and really gotten so much out of it and like felt ready to kind of take that next step. Um, and then I got pregnant very fast and suddenly it was the pandemic and I was finding out that I was pregnant with my first kid and it was just a crazy wild experience, like unlike anything I can even explain. How bizarre and strange and lonely, but also exciting and kind of magical. Um, but yeah, Little Stage was born in December 2020.
That's not
Um,
actually his name for people
his
listening.
name is Julian. Yeah. And so yeah, that's been a whole new thing and just really has changed my perspective in so many ways on my priorities and like what I want my life to be and precipitated like so many big changes in my life. Yeah, I don't even know where to start with that. It's been a crazy experience.
Well, let's fast forward a little bit to when you decided to leave Adobe and you were in consideration, like you were deciding whether to leave Adobe to take a new role at Unity. Um, what was that process, and how was that decision affected by, having a kid and
Mhm.
where, all that you had accomplished at Adobe? What
That
changed?
was that was an even bigger decision for sure than moving to Adobe. I think just because I'd built so many incredible relationships at that company and had been there, for a while. It was crazy to see the team grow from like 7 PMs to I think when I left there were over 40 and now there's like upwards of 80 or 90 PMs in the Express organization. It's insane for me to even fathom that from where we started. And so I was feeling like I wasn't looking for a new job at all. Like I had not been out there searching or interviewing or anything. And then a friend of mine, Timony West, who I'd known from San Francisco for many years, like since the pre-Twitter days almost, reached out and said that they were building a new team within Unity, and it was all about creating social 3D content. And they were like, "You have the experience in creating, the content creation landscape. You understand the audience that we're trying to reach. And I think you'd be like a really great person to join this company and work under me and like help me build this team." And I was like, I love Adobe and I don't want to leave, but also we had been in the express meat grinder for a really long
Mhm,
time
mhm.
and it was slow going and I was feeling frustrated and just kind of stuck in many ways. And I didn't really see a path for me to get into management because there's just so many talented people on that team. And I was like, I think if I don't leave, I'm going to just be doing the same thing for a really long time. And, at this point, I'm, 40, 41. And like, if I want to move into leadership positions, like I have to start thinking about what that next move is going to be. And that is something I wanted to do. That was important to me to continue to advance in my career. And
Why
so
was it
I,
important? Why was it important?
it's a very interesting question. I feel like you asked me one time, like, where I saw myself in, like, 10 years, and I think I said I wanted to be VP of product at a company somewhere, and that felt so far off in my life at that stage, it was almost farcical to even say. But, like, I didn't even know what else to say. I was like, what is a perfect career for me to even look like? Like, what does that mean? I think I was looking at someone like Scott Belsky and being like, that's what I want. I want to be like Scott. I want to be like the face of a company. I want to be able to make the decisions as if as if anyone makes any decisions really, at a company that large at the end of the day. But like that to me seemed like a really great kind of opportunity. And I was like, well, how do I get there? I have to learn how to be a leader. I have to learn how to be a good manager. I have to like, and honestly, Brian, like I don't want to toot your horn too much, but you are like the epitome of what I consider like a great manager.
Well, that's nice of you to say.
No, seriously, like, if you would hear all of us talk about, like, how sad we were when you left Adobe, like, you would probably be really embarrassed. But it was very traumatic for all of us.
Mhm.
But I was like, "How do I be like that? Like, how can I be, like, someone who's, like, a mentor to people and, like, helps them advance in their career? I've had so many people in my life who have helped me. Like, how can I pay that forward?" Um and so this opportunity felt like a way to do that. Like, I get to help build a team. I get to launch a totally new product at a company that's never gone after this type of audience before. It's a fully remote position. Like, all of the team is distributed around the world. Like, we can make our own hours. We can just like really like execute and get things done. It was that same promise like of when I joined Adobe, which was like, we are a startup within a larger organization. We get to make the rules for ourselves. And it
Mhm.
felt like that same kind of like, oh my gosh, like I get to do this again. Like, maybe this is what I love, is like starting something new or helping to build something new at a company and help expand their product repertoire, like give them something new to work with. Um, that ultimately ended up being kind of like why we didn't succeed, was because the company, this is all public knowledge. This has all been in the analyst calls and all that stuff. So I'm not saying anything out of line, but they wanted to get back to brass tacks. They wanted to focus on their strongest product, which is the editor, the thing they're known for. And they wanted to focus on ads, which is the other thing that they monetize. And everything else was no longer a priority.
Mm.
So even though we had worked for a year and a half on this incredible product that was, really, I think, could have opened the door to a completely new customer for them as a business, it didn't work out. And I'm just really proud of the team that we built and the fact that we stayed together throughout the whole time, through multiple reorgs, multiple new managers, a lot of adversity, a lot of confusion about what we were doing in some ways, because we were like a fully web-based product in a company that had never had that before. So that was, also more echoes of our work at Adobe.
Mhm.
Um, but so that was really tough, but I'm really happy that I got to have that opportunity. And, I discovered that I really do like being a manager and like working with people and helping them develop and figure out what their strengths are and where they need to improve. And that's been a huge learning experience for me.
So you left Adobe, took a role as director of product management.
Yeah, big
Um,
jump.
Big jump. Congratulations on that.
Thanks.
And led that team, got something released, and then there was
We
a
never
layoff.
released. We never released.
Never released.
No, never got to
You guys
publicly
talked about
release.
it publicly, though.
We did. We were announced at our
Yeah,
big conference. Yeah.
okay. So it was announced, but it was not released. Got
Mhm.
it, got it,
Yep.
got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes more sense. Um, so then, how many months after the announcement were the layoffs?
The announcement was in November, and we all got laid off on, like, January 10th, I think, of this year.
What
Yeah.
was the layoff experience like?
Um, we knew layoffs were coming, and they were coming in waves, and we made the first wave, and then when the second one came up, I started getting intel that didn't sound good for us. And so I didn't want to I got caught in that position of like, do I let on that I know, or do I keep the rah-rah cheerleader, we're gonna be fine kind of attitude? Um, and I opted to just assume the best, like assume that we were gonna be okay. And we weren't. And so that was really hard. And I think so I mean, when a company lays off 25% of their employees, like, it's hard not to be impacted in one way or another. Either people you work with closely are going to be impacted, or you're going to be impacted directly. And so I think we all had that kind of foreboding sense that things were going to change. And it was hard. It was definitely hard. And I think the hardest thing is just like the fact that we didn't get to release. We didn't get to show the world like what we had been working on, that we were so proud of and had come so far with. And we had pivoted also, like we had gone through a total product pivot back in the summer. So we had completely, almost from scratch, rebuilt the product into something completely different. And that was a huge meat grinder and a lot of late nights and working weekends and, keeping the teams morale up and just like
Mhm.
keeping them going. And it was always like there's going to be a light at the end of the tunnel. And it just like the light never came.
Well, so now you find yourself,
Fun
out of
employed.
a job for the first time in a while.
Yeah.
Um, are you enjoying that? Are you hating that? How is that? What do you want to see come out of this
I think
little
it depends on the time of day you ask me,
Uh-huh.
honestly. I've always really tied a lot of my self-worth into my professional career. And I think a lot of people do.
Yeah.
Um, and so this is really the first time that I've been I think I went into a bit of a spiral and like couldn't go on social media, couldn't like go online, didn't want to talk to anybody, just wanted to like totally decompress for like a week and a half after the layoffs happened. And then I was like, all right, maybe Ryan really wanted me to take some time. He's like, I really want you to take like 1 month, maybe 2 months of just like not thinking about work. Like, you have severance, like take some time, figure out what you want to do or not, or just like go read a book at a cafe, like go on some hikes. Like we live in the most beautiful part of the country. Like focus on your health and wellness. Like I've been you follow me on Strava. I've been
I
skiing
do.
like every other
Yep.
day. Skiing is my passion. So I ski whenever I can. The conditions have not been great.
No.
But climbing when the weather is good, like I started taking kickboxing classes, like just anything I can do to get myself out of the house and work on myself a little bit. Just because as a mom of a toddler, as someone who is working full time, managing a team, working on a new product, like the free time was not coming in droves.
Mhm.
And so even working remotely, I find it very difficult to like take time off during the workday to go do something for myself, but every evening after 4:30 until 6:30 is kid time. And I'm not going to give that up either. So the me time was very difficult to find. So I think that's, with these new priorities of being a mom and living someplace where I have so much amazing access to the stuff I love to do, I have to figure out like what kind of job, what kind of career is going to allow me to have that balance for real? Like how do I make that a priority? How do I keep sane and like do good work that I'm really proud of, build great teams, support my employees, but also like support myself and be there for my family. And I think that's like kind of the ultimate question, I think that's something we all struggle with as humans, as parents, as people in this crazy industry. Like I know you've probably grappled with a lot of that throughout the years. So that's just what I'm doing now is figuring out what I want to do next and what that's going to look like and figuring out who to talk to about those kinds of things moving forward and like what projects and companies interest me. And that's going to be the next step. But I've got a couple more weeks before I'm going to start thinking about that.
Well, I will not grill you on that. We'll eagerly watch and when you know, let me know. We
Mhm.
can share here for folks that want to find a great product leader who also is a great speaker
I'm
and
not gonna shut down the calls. If you wanna ping me on LinkedIn, like, I will still take the call, but I'm just not gonna be scrolling too much looking for jobs for a few more weeks.
it is doom scrolling in the job hunting world right now. So I think that's wise. Well,
Mhm.
so Veronica, uh, this has been really great to just hear your story. I do have a few questions just about your career in totality and kind of where you are now. Um, a little rapid fire. Like,
Okay.
what's been the most fun job that you've had?
Like, ever?
Yeah. What's the job you had the
Geez.
most fun at?
My instinct is to say the early days of Spark at Adobe because we just had so much fun. We were such goofballs, and, like, that crew and many of them are still there. And I love following what they're up to online and what they're doing. Like we just had an incredible blast. But I did do some pretty fun like one-off gigs. Like I did the 50th anniversary of It's a Small World at Disneyland,
Oh,
and where I got to interview the composer, whose name I'm forgetting right now. I'm so sorry. But that was like I got to basically just like hang out in Disneyland for like 3 days for free and ride all the rides and work for like an hour. And that was amazing. So that was a high point for
that
me.
sounds.
I'm a Disney girl. Like I do love a good Disney
Are you a
trip.
Disney adult?
I can't say that I'm a Disney adult because that
Okay,
means a very specific thing,
it
and
does.
I'm
That's
not
why I
quite
just had to
there.
ask. All right. Who are the people that have had the biggest impact on your career?
You honestly, like seriously, like I'm not just trying to flatter you. Like the fact that you saw the potential and like helped me find that path, like that was, I mean, that was a huge moment in my life. Like, and again, it was one of those turning points, I think, in my career. And I really hope that I can, like I said, pay that forward to someone else in the future and be able to help them in that way. Um, Jason Calacanis, also really, I mean, many of you in your audience probably know his name. He not only did he convince Ryan to ask me out, but he did give me that first. Ryan won't admit to that, but he did like really give me my first post CNET job, and again, like another person who took a chance on me, and that really changed things. Um, and yeah, I guess I have to say Ryan has had a huge impact just because he's always been in my corner and always, wanted what's best for me and for our family. And he's been such a cheerleader for me forever. So that's been huge too.
That's pretty fortunate to have a partner like that, and also someone who works in a similar field and all that
Yes.
kind of stuff.
Yeah.
um, so I'm curious if your career ended now, and I'm not saying it is, but if it just you didn't work anymore, what do you think you'd be most proud of?
Hmm. Hmm. Well, that's a really good question. What am I most proud of? My instinct is to say, like, all the times I've gotten up on really big stages and been able to hold my shit together and, like, do a good job under those types of, like, really impressive moments, but I don't think it's, like, the impressive moments. I think it's just the pushing forward and knowing what I want and really working hard as I could to get there. Um, I mean, I guess it sounds a little cliche, but, like, I'm pretty proud of that I was like, "I'm gonna do a complete career pivot at, like, 35, and I'm just gonna try something completely new, and maybe I'll suck at it, maybe I won't, but, like, I'm never gonna forgive myself if I at least don't make the attempt." Um, so I think that's what I'm most proud of.
It's worth being proud of that. I'm proud of you for that. What similarly, if you didn't work again, what do you think you'd regret not doing that you haven't done yet, or something that you want to accomplish that you haven't yet accomplished?
Hmm, something that I haven't yet accomplished. I mean, I really would have liked to have launched that product.
I got news. I don't know if that's gonna happen.
I mean, not since disco have I been there. Well, we relaunched Express, and that was huge, at
Hmm.
Adobe. That was a big deal for sure. I would love to take another product from 0 to 1, I think, and get it out the door. I think that has been such a something I've worked so hard on the past year and a half, that I think that I've got that, like, desire now to, like, see it through and get it out there. Um, so hopefully I'll still get the chance to do that.
All right, last question, I think. If you could go back and give young Veronica, smaller stage Veronica, career advice, What do you think you'd tell her?
Hmm. That's so hard because having anything that I had done differently would have changed things in ways that I can't even comprehend, you know? So I really can't regret the path at all. I think I wish I had taken things a little less personally. I think I've always had a hard time kind of like not wearing my heart on my sleeve a little bit, and maybe developing that thicker skin would have helped me mentally a little bit more, but I just don't know if that's my personality. I don't know if that even would have been possible. Um, Maybe just spending more time not reading the comments online would have been helpful. Um, but ultimately, like, I think we've talked in the past, like, I was like, maybe I should get my MBA. Maybe that's going to help my career more. But like so many people I met at Adobe, like didn't do that, didn't have that path and were still so successful. And so that was really, I mean, that helped. I think having had the experience now and understanding what it means to be a product manager, like I can see why that would be beneficial. And I can also see why the path that I took is also beneficial in a lot of ways. So I don't have regrets there.
Amazing. Veronica, thank you so much for joining and sharing what's, I think, a very unique journey that's still being written. And I can't wait to see what you do next. And if folks have not already, I'd ask everyone to click the like button, click subscribe, and head on over to patreon.com/workdad. Sign up, support the show. We've got a bunch more guests to bring aboard. Veronica, thank you so much for being our very first guest on the WorkDad podcast.
It was a blast. Thank you.
Awesome.